They called them billion-dollar eyes, piercing, cold, and utterly unique to the Beasley bloodline. Ronald thought he was the last one left. Then he saw a reflection in his limo window that wasn't his own, staring back from the arms of the woman who broke his heart. Welcome to Stories That Touch. Before we begin, say hello in the comments and let us know which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these emotions travel. By the end of this video, rate the story from 0 to 10 and tell us if it touched your heart. If you love narratives full of twists and deep emotion, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment. Now, get comfortable and let the story unfold. The humidity inside the armored Maybach was set to a precise 68 degrees, a stark, artificial winter against the tropical violence raging outside. Ronald Beasley adjusted his platinum cufflink, staring at the gray deluge turning Brickell Avenue into a rushing river. Beside him sat Elena, the CEO of rival firm Horizon Tech. She wasn't a lover, and she wasn't a friend. She was a mirror of his own life, sharp, profitable, and meticulously scheduled. They were en route to the merger of the decade, a deal that would finally cement Ronald as the untouchable king of Brickell. The valuation holds, Elena said, tapping her tablet, her voice devoid of friction. We sign in 20 minutes. Ronald looked at his reflection in the darkened glass. The eyes staring back were electric blue, the famous Beasley gaze that had terrified board members for 20 years. He had the empire. He had the billions. But looking at himself, he felt a hollow ache in his chest, a vacuum where a heart should be. Traffic is stalled, sir, the driver announced, his voice muffled by the drumroll of rain on the roof. Ronald sighed, shifting his gaze past his reflection to the sidewalk. Pedestrians were scattering like ants under a magnifying glass, diving for awnings. But one figure wasn't running. She was standing near the curb, wrestling with a black umbrella that the wind had snapped inside out. She wore a trench coat soaked through to the skin, her posture bent against the gale. Ronald's breath hitched. He knew the arch of that neck. He knew the stubborn set of that jaw. Flora. She turned, looking for a break in the traffic. She wasn't alone. Clutched tightly against her chest, shielded by her body, were two bundles wrapped in wool. Babies. Twins. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ronald leaned forward, pressing his face toward the cold glass. A flash of lightning tore the sky open, illuminating the street in stark white light. For a split second, the babies looked up. Ronald stopped breathing. Superimposed over the rain-streaked window, his own reflection merged with the infants outside. The man in the glass had piercing, rare cerulean eyes. The babies in Flora's arms, both of them, stared back with the exact same shocking shade of blue. It was a genetic signature that couldn't be faked, a biological receipt for a transaction he never knew took place. "Stop the car," Ronald commanded. The hollowness in his chest was instantly filled with a terrifying, molten heat. "Sir, the merger! I said stop the damn car!" Ronald threw the door open. The climate-controlled silence shattered, replaced by the roar of thunder and honking horns. He stepped into the flooded street, his Italian loafers instantly ruining, the rain soaking his suit in seconds. He didn't care about the merger. He didn't care about the board. "Flora!" he roared, his voice tearing through the storm. She froze. Across the lanes of gridlocked traffic, her eyes met his. There was no joy in her recognition, only a stark, primal terror. She clutched the twins tighter, looking not like a woman reunited with a lover, but a prey animal spotting a predator. In that look, Ronald felt the weight of the last 18 months crash down on him. He remembered the note she had left on his marble counter. "I can't survive your world," and the silence that had followed. He had convinced himself she left because she was weak. But as she turned and bolted into the crowd, shielding children with his eyes from the rain, he realized he had been wrong about everything. The rain on Brickell Avenue didn't just fall. It erased. Ronald Beasley stood in the middle of the street, the deluge hammering his shoulders, water streaming down his face like a second skin. He spun in a slow, frantic circle, his eyes scanning the sea of black umbrellas and fleeing pedestrians. But the figure in the beige trench coat was gone. The crowd had swallowed Flora Bishop, and the two bundles she carried as if they had never existed at all. For a terrifying second, Ronald wondered if he had hallucinated the entire encounter. Perhaps the stress of the merger, combined with the sleepless nights and the hollow silence of his penthouse, had finally fractured his mind. But then he looked down. In the gutter, swirling toward a storm drain, was a small, pink, knitted mitten. It was tiny. Impossibly tiny. Ronald lunged, ruining the knees of his bespoke trousers on the slick asphalt, and snatched the wool from the water. He squeezed it in his fist. It was real. The heat of the encounter was still burning in his chest, a stark contrast to the ice-cold rain soaking him to the bone. "Mr. Beasley, sir!" His driver, Marcus, was standing by the open door of the Maybach, holding a large umbrella, his face pale with panic. Horns blared around them, a symphony of Miami rage. Ronald didn't run back to the car. He walked, his movements mechanical, his mind reeling. He collapsed into the back seat, bringing the smell of ozone and wet asphalt into the hermetically sealed luxury. Marcus slammed the door, shutting out the storm. The silence was deafening. "Drive," Ronald said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "To the signing, sir?" Marcus asked, eyeing him in the rearview mirror. "We are 18 minutes late, but if I take the shoulder—" "No," Ronald cut him off. He didn't look up. He was staring at the pink mitten in his hand. "Cancel it. Take me to the penthouse." Beside him, Elena gripped her tablet so hard her knuckles were white. The CEO of Horizon Tech was a woman who prided herself on composure, on being the unshakable force in a room full of panicked men. But now, she looked at Ronald as if he had just set fire to a pile of cash. "Ronald," Elena said, her voice dangerously low. "We have spent 9 months on this merger. The board is waiting. The press is waiting. You are soaking wet, and you are talking about canceling a $4 billion acquisition because you saw someone on the sidewalk?" Ronald turned to look at her. Water dripped from his hair onto the bridge of his nose. His blue eyes, usually sharp enough to cut glass, were wide and unguarded. "I didn't just see someone, Elena." "You are the king of Brickell," she hissed, though her posture stiffened. "You don't stop for pedestrians. My shareholders will sue. Your mother will." At the mention of his mother, Ronald's phone lit up on the center console. Victoria Beasley. It was the 5th call in 2 minutes. The screen flashed like a warning beacon. "Let her sue," Ronald said, picking up the phone and holding the power button until the screen went black. "Let them all sue." Elena stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She had known Ronald for a decade. She knew him as a machine of industry, a man who viewed emotions as inefficiencies in the system. She had never seen him shiver. "Who was she?" Elena asked, her tone shifting from anger to a bewildered curiosity. Ronald looked back at the window, watching the gray city blur past. "Flora." "The ex? The one who left a 1.5 years ago?" Elena frowned. "Ronald, getting closure is one thing, but tanking a merger, she was holding babies, Elena." The car went silent. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the squeak of leather as Ronald shifted. "Babies?" Elena repeated softly. "Twins," Ronald whispered. He closed his eyes, and the image flashed behind his lids. High definition, seared into his memory. Lightning flashed. "They looked up at me. They had my eyes." He turned to her, desperate for validation, for someone to tell him the math made sense. Not just blue. My blue. The Beasley blue. You know how rare it is. The shape, the color. It was like looking in a mirror. Elena's expression changed. The corporate shark, the woman who could dismantle a company with a spreadsheet, vanished. Her shoulders dropped. The tension in her jaw released. She looked at Ronald not as a rival, but as a human being. "How old?" she asked. "Infants. 6 months. 8. The timeline. It fits. She left 18 months ago." Ronald raked a hand through his wet hair. "She didn't tell me. She just left." Elena reached into her purse. Ronald expected her to pull out her phone to call her lawyers, to begin the process of destroying him for breach of contract. Instead, she pulled out a sleek, leather card holder. She extracted a simple white business card and pressed it into Ronald's damp hand. "I have 2 daughters," Elena said quietly. Ronald blinked, surprised. "I didn't know that. Keep them out of the press, for good reason." She nodded at the card. "That is the number of the private investigator I used during my divorce. He is expensive, he is discreet, and he can find a ghost in a blizzard." "Elena, the merger." "Screw the merger," she said, her voice firm. "Deals can be restructured, money can be recovered. But if those are your children, Ronald, that is a timeline you don't get back." She leaned back, smoothing her skirt. "I'm a mother first. CEO is a distant second. If you don't go find them, you're a fool. And I don't do business with fools." The car pulled up to the curb of the Beasley Tower. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the sky was still an ominous charcoal gray. "Thank you," Ronald said. "Don't thank me yet," Elena warned, glancing at his dark phone. "Victoria is going to be out for blood when she finds out you walked away. If Flora hid those children, she likely had a reason. And if that reason has anything to do with your family, you better be ready for a war." The penthouse was silent, a glass box floating 50 stories above the chaos of Miami. It was a masterpiece of minimalism, Italian marble, chrome accents, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the empire Ronald ruled. Usually, this space made him feel powerful. Tonight, it felt like a mausoleum. Ronald stripped off his ruined suit, leaving the wet pile of expensive fabric on the floor of the foyer, a chaotic act of disorder he never would have permitted yesterday. He pulled on a pair of jeans and a black t-shirt, clothes he hadn't worn in years, and walked into his study. He sat before his terminal, a massive curved monitor that hummed to life. "Algorithm of regret," he muttered to himself. He had spent his life relying on data. If he needed to acquire a company, he analyzed the numbers. If he needed to predict a market trend, he ran the models. Now, he needed to find a woman who didn't want to be found. He started with the basics. Flora Bishop. The cursor blinked. Credit cards. 0 activity for 18 months. Social media. Accounts deleted. Bank transfers. The account he had set up for her, a parting gift he had insisted on, despite her refusal, remained untouched. The balance sat there, mocking him. He moved to facial recognition. He had access to proprietary software, tools that scraped public camera feeds and social media backgrounds. He uploaded a photo of Flora from 2 years ago, a candid shot he had taken on a yacht, her hair windblown, laughing. It was the only photo of her he had kept. The system churned. No matches found. "Damn it!" Ronald slammed his fist onto the desk. His phone, which he had tossed onto the sofa, began to buzz again. The screen lit up the dark room. Mother. He ignored it. He ignored the emails flooding his inbox from the board of directors. He ignored the news alert that popped up in the corner of his screen. Beasley merger stalled? CEO absent. He was looking for the wrong things. He was looking for Flora Bishop, the woman who had lived in this penthouse. He was looking for luxury. But he had seen her on the street, wrestling a cheap umbrella, wearing a trench coat that had seen better days. She wasn't living the life he had offered. She was surviving. "Think," Ronald hissed, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes. "If she wanted to hide from us, from the Beasley name, where would she go?" Little Havana. The thought struck him. Flora had a grandmother who used to live there, a woman who had passed away years ago. Flora used to talk about the smell of Café Cubano and the sound of dominoes in the park. She had said it was the only place in Miami that felt like a community, not a commodity. Ronald changed his search parameters. He stopped looking for Flora Bishop. He started looking for utility hookups. He accessed the public records for the county water and power department, a legal gray area, but he didn't care. He searched for the maiden name of Flora's grandmother, Reyes. Thousands of hits. He cross-referenced with new accounts opened in the last 18 months. 500 hits. He filtered by household size or usage. A single woman with twins would have distinct consumption patterns. High water usage for laundry. Consistent power usage at night. He narrowed the search to the Little Havana district. 12 hits. He began manually checking the addresses. Most were old houses. But one was a walk-up apartment on a street that intersected with a bus route that led directly to the pediatrician's office on 8th Street. He pulled up the lease agreement image attached to the utility file. It was a scanned document, grainy and faint. The signature at the bottom was scrawled, barely legible. F. Reyes. But the handwriting, the way the F looped at the top, he had seen that F on the note she left him. "I can't survive your world." Ronald froze. He zoomed in on the date. The lease started 1 month after she left him. He checked the address. It was miles away from the gated communities and security patrols of his world. It was a neighborhood of working families, of noise and life and struggle. The clock on his screen read 8:45 p.m. 6 hours since he had seen her. 6 hours of the trail getting cold. He stood up, grabbing the keys to the Range Rover, the car he kept for rough terrain, but never drove. His phone rang again. This time, the voicemail indicator beeped. He paused, his hand hovering over the device. He knew he should listen. He knew Victoria Beasley would be leaving a message that detailed exactly how she planned to dismantle him for his insolence today. Ronald grabbed the phone, but he didn't check the message. He shoved it into his pocket. The corporate empire he had spent 20 years building was currently burning to the ground. Stocks were likely plummeting. His reputation was taking a beating. His mother was sharpening her knives. Let it burn. Ronald Beasley walked out of the penthouse, the address in Little Havana burning a hole in his mind. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing a prophet. He was chasing a ghost who held the only future that mattered. The Range Rover felt like an intruder. Ronald navigated the narrow, potholed streets of Little Havana, the massive vehicle taking up too much space, its polished black chassis reflecting the neon glow of ventanitas and corner bodegas. Here, the storm had left its mark differently. In Brickell, the rain washed the glass towers clean. Here, it pooled in deep, muddy puddles, turning the sidewalks into obstacle courses. He parked illegally in front of a faded yellow building that looked like it was exhaling the day's humidity. The stucco was peeling in large, sunburned flakes, revealing the concrete bones beneath. A rusted wrought iron fence guarded a small patch of overgrown grass where a discarded tricycle lay on its side. Ronald stepped out. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, frying plantains, and the exhaust of a passing city bus. It was a sensory assault compared to the sterile, filtered oxygen of the Beasley Tower. He checked the piece of paper in his hand, though he didn't need to. The address was burned into his retinas, apartment 3B. He didn't lock the car. A part of him didn't care if it was there when he came back. The front door of the building was propped open with a cinder block. Ronald stepped into the vestibule, the fluorescent light above buzzing like an entrapped insect. There was no elevator. Of course, there was no elevator. Flora had carried 2 infants, groceries, and a stroller up 3 flights of stairs every single day. The thought made his stomach twist. He climbed the stairs, his boots heavy on the worn linoleum. First floor. Second floor. The sounds of life bled through the thin doors. A television blaring a telenovela, a dog barking, the clatter of dishes. It was a cacophony of living, so different from the silence of his penthouse, where the only sound was the hum of the wine fridge. Third floor. He stood before 3B. The number was a brass sticker, slightly crooked. A woven mat that said, "Bienvenidos," sat in front of the door. Ronald raised his hand. His fist, usually so steady when slamming down on a boardroom table, trembled slightly. He knocked. 3 sharp raps. Then, silence. He waited. He could hear movement inside, a soft scuff of feet. A hush. She knew. She had to know. The lock tumbled. 1, 2, 3 clicks. A deadbolt, a chain, a handle. Security born of necessity, not luxury. The door creaked open. Flora stood in the sliver of light. She looked nothing like the woman who had graced the society pages on his arm 2 years ago. The silk gowns and diamond studs were gone. She wore a pair of gray yoga pants that had seen better days and a stained, oversized t-shirt. Her hair, usually a cascade of dark waves, was pulled into a messy, utilitarian bun held together by a chip clip. Dark circles bruised the skin under her eyes. She looked exhausted. She looked worn down. And yet, as she looked up at him, Ronald saw something else. Her chin was tilted up. Her shoulders were squared. She looked fierce, like a lioness standing at the mouth of a cave. "You found us," she said. Her voice wasn't surprised. It was resigned. Flat. "Flora," Ronald breathed. The name felt like a prayer and a curse all at once. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I hoped," she said softly. She didn't move out of the doorway. She blocked the view of the apartment with her body. "You're wet, Ronald." "I don't care." "You should go. You don't belong here." "I saw them, Flora," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "On the street. I saw them." Flora's mask cracked, just for a second. Her eyes darted down the hallway, checking for neighbors, before she stepped back and pulled the door wider. "Get in, before you wake the whole building." Ronald stepped over the threshold, and the world shifted again. If the building was decaying, the apartment was a fortress of warmth. It was tiny, shockingly so. The living room and kitchen were one cramped space, but it was aggressively, violently alive. Colorful playmat covered the scuffed hardwood floor. Plastic toys in primary colors were scattered everywhere. A drying rack in the corner was draped with tiny onesies and bibs. It smelled of lavender baby powder and milk, a scent so domestic it made Ronald feel like an alien species. He felt gargantuan in the room. His presence seemed to suck the oxygen out of the small space. He stood near the door, afraid to move, afraid he might break something, just by existing. "They're sleeping," Flora said, closing the door and leaning her back against it, as if to stop him from leaving, or perhaps to stop the outside world from coming in. Ronald turned. In the corner of the room, shielded from the window by a heavy curtain, were 2 cribs. He didn't ask for permission. He couldn't. The magnetic pull was too strong. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He gripped the white wooden railing of the first crib. A boy. He was sleeping on his back, his arms thrown up by his head in a surrender pose. He had a tuft of dark hair, just like Ronald's. His mouth was slightly open, a tiny bubble of saliva resting on his lip. Ronald moved to the second crib. A girl. She was curled on her side, clutching a stuffed rabbit that looked ragged from love. Her features were softer, more like Flora's. But the brow, the determined set of that sleeping brow, was all Beasley. "Oliver and Emma," Flora said from behind him. Ronald gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. Oliver and Emma. Names. They had names. They weren't abstract concepts or lines on a spreadsheet. They were breathing, living human beings. The boy, Oliver, shifted. He let out a small sigh, scrunching his nose, and then his eyelids fluttered open. Ronald held his breath. The baby blinked, trying to focus in the dim light. And then he found Ronald. The eyes. Up close, without the rain and the window between them, the impact was physical. It was like looking into a time machine. The irises were a startling electric cerulean, ringed with a darker navy. They were Ronald's eyes. They were his grandfather's eyes. The genetic stamp of the Beasley bloodline, undeniable and absolute. Ronald felt his knees weaken. He sank down, kneeling on the playmat, bringing his face level with the bars. Oliver stared back, curious, unafraid. "Why?" The word cracked in Ronald's throat. He didn't look at Flora. He couldn't look away from his son. "Why, Flora? I have endless resources. I saw you struggling in the rain, wrestling an umbrella, living in a walk-up." He gestured vaguely around the cramped room. "I have a penthouse with empty rooms. I have billions of dollars sitting in accounts doing nothing. They could have had the world." He turned his head then, looking up at her. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed. "Was I that terrible to you? Did you hate me that much?" Flora pushed off the door. She walked over to the kitchenette and picked up a dish towel, twisting it in her hands. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked sad. "I didn't leave because I hated you, Ronald," she said quietly. "I left because I loved them." "That doesn't make sense," Ronald snapped, standing up. The sorrow was quickly morphing into the familiar armor of anger. "I could have given them the best doctors, the best schools, the best security. You denied them their birthright." "I denied them a cage," Flora hissed, her voice rising, then instantly checking herself, glancing at the cribs. She took a step closer to him, her eyes flashing. "Look at you, Ronald. You missed a merger meeting today, and you're falling apart. You think money is a shield? In your world, money is a target." "I can protect them." "Can you?" Flora challenged. "Can you protect them from the board meetings that go until 2 a.m.? Can you protect them from the paparazzi who would camp outside their preschool? Can you protect them from being measured by their net worth before they can even walk? That is my life. I handle it." "You survive it," Flora corrected. "You don't live it. You are married to that tower, Ronald. You are married to the stock price. When I found out I was pregnant, I was happy for about an hour. And then I realized what it would mean to bring a child into the Beasley machine." She walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside slightly to look down at the street. "Here, they are just Oliver and Emma. The lady at the bodega gives them free cookies. The neighbors watch out for them. They are happy. They aren't heirs. They aren't leverage." "Leverage?" Ronald frowned. The word felt out of place. "Who would use them as leverage? Me?" Flora turned back to him, her expression hardening. A shadow passed over her face, something dark and frightened that she tried to hide behind anger. "You aren't the only Beasley, Ronald." The air in the room grew colder. Ronald stiffened. "My mother." Flora didn't say the name. She didn't have to. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of Victoria Beasley. "She came to see me," Flora whispered. "A week before I left. She knew, Ronald. She has spies everywhere. She knew I was pregnant before I even told you." Ronald felt a sick lurch in his gut. What did she say? She didn't offer congratulations, Flora said with a bitter laugh. She brought a contract, a prenuptial agreement for a marriage we hadn't even discussed, and a custody arrangement. Custody? She said the Beasley heirs would be raised properly. She talked about boarding schools in Switzerland, about nannies who specialize in discipline. She said I was a lovely distraction for you, but that I wasn't equipped to raise a dynasty. Flora walked over to the cribs, standing between Ronald and the children, a physical barrier. She threatened to take them, Ronald. She said if I tried to fight her, she would bury me in legal fees until I was homeless. She said she would paint me as unfit, as unstable. She said, by the time she was done, I'd be lucky to see them on Christmas. Ronald stared at her. He wanted to call her a liar. He wanted to say his mother was difficult, controlling perhaps, but not a monster. But he knew Victoria. He knew the way she moved pieces on a board. He knew that for Victoria, family wasn't about love. It was about legacy preservation. So you ran, Ronald said. I chose poverty, Flora said fiercely. I chose struggling in the rain. I chose this tiny apartment and the peeling paint. Because here, they are mine. Here, no one is trying to mold them into little cold-hearted statues. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. I didn't run from you, Ronald. I ran from the threat of them becoming you. The words landed like a physical blow. Ronald flinched. He looked back at the crib. Oliver was asleep again, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. The threat of them becoming you. Was that what he was? A warning? A cautionary tale? He looked at his hands. They were the hands that signed billion-dollar deals. They were hands that could crush competitors. But standing here, in this room filled with warmth and struggle, those hands felt empty. Useless. I didn't know, Ronald whispered. The anger drained out of him, leaving only the hollow ache he had felt in the car. But now, it was worse. Now, it was shame. I didn't know she did that. I know you didn't, Flora said, her voice softening slightly. If I told you, you would have tried to fix it with lawyers. You would have tried to negotiate. But you can't negotiate with a hurricane, Ronald. You just get out of the path. She won't stop, Ronald said, the realization dawning on him with terrifying clarity. If she found out I missed the merger, if she tracks me here, she can't find us. I was careful. I found you, Ronald pointed out grimly. And if I found you, she isn't far behind. As if on cue, the sound of a car engine cut through the ambient noise of the street, outside. Not the rattling muffler of a local sedan, but the deep, powerful purr of a large SUV. Flora froze. Her eyes went wide. Ronald moved to the window. He peered through the slit in the curtains. Down on the street, parked directly behind his Range Rover, was a black Suburban. The windows were tinted, but the rear door was opening. A man in a dark suit stepped out. Then another. And then, a woman with a briefcase. They weren't police. They were something far more expensive. Ronald? Flora's voice trembled. Ronald turned from the window. The shock was gone. The confusion was gone. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. The Beasley gaze that Elena had warned him about. But this time, it wasn't directed at a ledger. It was directed at the threat outside. "Pack a bag," Ronald commanded, his voice low and steady. "What?" "Diapers. Formula. Whatever they need for 24 hours. Do it now." "Ronald, who is outside?" He walked over to the door and threw the deadbolt back into place, engaging the chain. "The hurricane," Ronald said, "and she's made landfall." The lock clicked into place, a flimsy piece of metal against the weight of the billions sitting in the SUV downstairs. Ronald turned from the door, his chest heaving. The adrenaline that had propelled him up the stairs was now curdling into a cold, sharp focus. He watched Flora frantically stuffing diapers into a worn canvas tote. Her hands were shaking. "Flora, stop," Ronald said. His voice was low, cutting through the panicked rustle of fabric. She didn't stop. "They're here. You said it yourself. The hurricane made landfall. We have to go out the fire escape. If we go now, maybe we can cut through the alley. Flora!" He crossed the room and grabbed her wrists. Her skin was cold, her pulse hammering against his thumbs. "We aren't running down a fire escape in a thunderstorm with 2 infants. Not until I know exactly what we are running from." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and wild. "We are running from your mother, Ronald. Isn't that enough?" "No," he said, releasing her hands, but holding her gaze. "It's not. You said she threatened you. You said she had papers. I need the specifics. If I'm going to fight her, I need to know the weapon she's using." Flora stepped back, hugging her arms around her midsection, as if trying to hold herself together. She looked at the door, then back at the cribs where the twins were still miraculously asleep. "She came to the penthouse," Flora began, her voice trembling. "It was a Tuesday. You were in Tokyo for the semiconductor summit. I was happy. I had just found out about the twins. I was going to surprise you when you got back." Ronald felt a phantom pain in his chest. He remembered that trip. He remembered coming home to an empty apartment and a Dear John letter. He had assumed she left because she was bored. "She sat on the white sofa," Flora continued, staring into the middle distance. "She didn't even take off her coat. She told me that she had been monitoring my medical records, that she knew about the complication." "Complication?" Ronald repeated, the word tasting like ash. "She called my children a complication." "She called them unauthorized heirs." Flora looked at him, her expression hardening. "She had a file, Ronald, a binder. It had profiles of boarding schools in Switzerland, the strict kind, the kind where they take your phone and your name and turn you into a perfect little soldier." Ronald felt the blood drain from his face. He knew those schools. He had attended one, the Institut La Rosey. Cold winters, colder dormitories, and letters from home that were typed by secretaries. "She told me," Flora whispered, "that the Beasley bloodline was too valuable to be left to chance or maternal sentiment. She said that if I gave birth to them, she would invoke a morality clause in the company bylaws, something about the stability of the family trust. She had 3 lawyers with her. They showed me a petition for emergency custody." "On what grounds?" Ronald demanded. "You're their mother." "On the grounds that I was a temporary companion with no financial standing, living in her son's property," Flora said, her voice breaking. "She said she would paint me as a gold digger, as mentally unstable. She said she would drag my name through the mud until no one would hire me, and then she would take the babies for their own protection." The room went deadly silent. Outside, thunder rumbled, low and menacing, vibrating the thin window panes. Ronald walked over to the peeling yellow wall and leaned against it, feeling the grit of the plaster against his hand. He felt sick, physically ill. For years, he had prided himself on his freedom. He was the bachelor billionaire, the man who couldn't be tied down. He thought his lack of a family was his choice, a sacrifice he made for the empire. Now, the veil was ripped away. It wasn't a choice, it was a culling. Victoria hadn't just been protecting the company, she had been pruning his life. Every girlfriend who didn't work out, every relationship that ended abruptly. How many of them had she visited? How many futures had she aborted before they could take root? "She played me," Ronald whispered. "My whole life. She's been the architect." "She said she would raise them the Beasley way," Flora said, tears finally spilling over. Cold, detached, ruthless. She said she would make sure they never knew who I was. She looked at Ronald, her eyes pleading. I couldn't let her turn them into you, Ronald. I couldn't. The insult should have stung. Instead, it hit him with the force of a revelation. Turn them into you. A man who checked stock prices before he checked in on his partner. A man who measured success in acquisition, not connection. A hollow man in a hollow tower. She wanted to take them to Switzerland, Ronald murmured, staring at the floor. She sent me there when I was 7. I didn't see her for 6 months. When I came back, I didn't hug her. I shook her hand. Looked up at Flora. I shook my own mother's hand. I wasn't going to let that happen to Oliver and Emma, Flora said fiercely. So I left. I changed my name. I moved to the one place she wouldn't look, a place with no prestige. Before Ronald could respond, a sound cut through the heavy atmosphere, a soft, gurgling cry. Then another. The tension in the room had woken them. Flora moved instinctively toward the cribs, but Ronald was closer to the boy. He's waking up, Ronald said, his voice panicked. He had handled hostile takeovers, federal indictments, and market crashes. But a waking infant terrified him. Pick him up, Flora said. She was lifting Emma, shushing her gently against her shoulder. I don't know how. He's your son, Ronald. Not a bomb. Support the head. Ronald reached into the crib. His hands, large and shaking, slid under the small, warm body. He lifted Oliver. The baby was heavier than he expected. Dense, solid, a living weight. Oliver squirmed, his face scrunching up in preparation for a wail. But then he settled against the strange, stiff fabric of Ronald's t-shirt. Ronald held him awkwardly, arms stiff, like he was holding a Ming vase. He looked down. Oliver's eyes opened. The blue was startling in the dim light. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected only innocence. There was no calculation in those eyes, no agenda, just pure, unadulterated need. And then Oliver moved his hand. His tiny fingers, no bigger than matchsticks, reached out and curled around Ronald's index finger. The grip was surprisingly strong. A reflex, the doctors would say. But to Ronald, it was an anchor. The ice that had encased his heart for 42 years didn't just crack, it shattered. It fell away in great jagged chunks, leaving him exposed and raw. A sound escaped Ronald's throat, a choked, wet noise. He's got me, Ronald whispered, his voice trembling. Flora, he's got me. Tears, hot and unfamiliar, welled in his eyes and spilled, over, tracking through the rain that had dried on his cheeks. He wasn't weeping for the merger. He wasn't weeping for the deception. He was weeping for the time. 18 months. He had missed the first breath, the first smile, the first time they rolled over. He had been sitting in boardrooms, arguing over fractions of a percent, while his son was learning to exist in a world without a father. I missed it, Ronald sobbed, bowing his head over the baby. He smelled the milk and the sleep, a scent that was more valuable than any asset in his portfolio. I missed everything. Flora watched him from across the room, rocking Emma. Her expression softened. The anger didn't vanish, but the fear receded, replaced by a cautious, fragile hope. She saw the way his large hand cradled the baby's head. She saw the way his shoulders shook. This wasn't the CEO. This was the father. You're here now, Flora said softly. Ronald looked up, his vision blurred. He wiped his face with his shoulder, careful not to jostle Oliver. I'm not just here, Flora. I'm here. He looked at the door where the threat lay waiting. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. What remained was a cold, terrifying clarity. She isn't taking them, Ronald said. His voice was no longer the rasp of a broken man. It was the steel of the titan of industry, but tempered with something new, something dangerous. She thinks she built me. She thinks she owns me. She's about to find out that the machine she built has a new directive. Ronald, Flora warned. She has lawyers. She has judges in her pocket. She has a court order. Let her have the judges, Ronald said, shifting Oliver so the baby was tucked securely against his chest. The boy cooed, settling into the rhythm of his father's heartbeat. I have the truth, and I have the one thing Victoria never accounted for. What? I don't care about the money anymore, Ronald said. He looked at Flora, and for the first time in 2 years, he truly smiled. It wasn't a shark's grin. It was a sad, determined smile. I'd burn the whole tower down to keep them warm, and tonight, I might have to. A buzz from the intercom near the door interrupted them. A long, harsh, insistent sound. Flora flinched. That's them. Don't answer it, Ronald said. They'll come up. The landlord. He'll let them in. Let them come up, Ronald said. He walked over to Flora and placed a hand on her shoulder. With his other arm, he held his son. Let them come, because they aren't finding a single mother alone in a walk-up anymore. They're finding a family. He looked at the diaper bag she had half packed. Finish packing, he said. Not for a getaway, but because we aren't coming back here. Where are we going? To war, Ronald said, turning to face the door. And then, to the only place she can't touch us. The buzzer sounded again, longer this time. Angry. Ronald didn't flinch. He looked down at Oliver, who was watching him with wide, trusting eyes. Don't worry, Ronald whispered to the baby, his voice thick with a promise that would reshape the skyline of Miami. Daddy's home. The buzzer stopped, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise. Ronald stood in the center of the cramped living room, Oliver still warm against his chest. The peace he had found in holding his son was evaporating, replaced by a vibrating tension that pricked at the base of his skull. His phone buzzed in his pocket, not the long, melodic ringtone assigned to his mother, but the sharp, double chirp of his internal comms. He shifted Oliver to his left arm, protecting the boy's head with a practiced care that surprised him, and pulled the phone out. Vargas. Luis Vargas was the head of security for Beasley Corp. He was a former Navy SEAL who spoke 3 languages and had been on Ronald's payroll for a decade. He was the only man in the company who answered to Ronald, not the board, and definitely not Victoria. Talk to me, Ronald answered, his voice low. Sir, you need to get away from the windows. Vargas's voice was clipped, professional, but urgency bled through the static. My perimeter alerts just tripped. A black Suburban, Florida plates. It's not law enforcement. I see them, Ronald said, glancing at the curtain. Who are they, Vargas? It's the cleaning crew, sir. My contacts in legal just flagged a priority dispatch. Your mother authorized a asset recovery team. Asset recovery? Ronald repeated, the absurdity of the corporate term making his blood boil. They're children, Luis, not hard drives. To her, there's no difference, Vargas said. Listen to me closely. The man leading them is unrecognizable to you, but I know him. Julian Thorne. He's a fixer for the high-end family law firms in the Gables. He's not there to negotiate. He's holding an emergency ex parte order, signed by Judge Holloway about 20 minutes ago. On what grounds? Imminent danger due to unfit living conditions, Vargas recited, the disgust audible. They fabricated an anonymous tip about squalor, drug use, and structural instability in the building. They aren't there to arrest anyone. They're there to execute an emergency removal of minors into protective custody, which means a private facility in Zurich. Flora gasped. She had been listening, standing close to Ronald's elbow. Drug use? Squalor? Look at this place. It's clean. It doesn't matter what the truth is, Vargas continued. It matters what the paper says. Thorne has private security with him. If they get those kids in the car, sir, they're gone. Once they cross state lines, or get on a private jet, the jurisdictional fight will take years. They aren't taking them, Ronald said. They're coming up the stairs, sir. I'm 10 minutes out. I'm bringing the cavalry, but you have to hold the line until I get there. Do not let them cross the threshold. If they enter, they can claim you resisted a court order. Understood. Ronald hung up. He turned to Flora. The fear in her eyes was agonizing to witness. She looked like she was already mourning them. Take him, Ronald said, gently passing Oliver back to her. Ronald, what are we going to do? If they have a judge's order— A judge's order is just paper, Ronald said, straightening his spine. He rolled his shoulders, the wet t-shirt pulling tight across his chest. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a brawler. And paper burns. He walked to the door. Go to the bedroom, close the door. Do not come out unless I tell you. Ronald, go, Flora. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then grabbed Emma from the other crib and rushed into the small bedroom, shutting the door with a soft click. Ronald was alone in the main room. He looked at the peeling paint. He looked at the plastic toys scattered on the floor. He looked at the cheap deadbolt. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, not the shuffling of neighbors, but the hard, rhythmic strike of leather-soled shoes. They stopped outside 3B. A knock, authoritative, arrogant. Ronald didn't wait for them to announce themselves. He unlocked the deadbolt, undid the chain, and ripped the door open. The hallway was dim, lit by a flickering fluorescent tube. 3 men stood there. In the front was Julian Thorne. He was a slick man in his 50s, wearing a suit that cost more than the entire apartment building. He had a silver fox smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him were 2 men who were clearly not lawyers. They were wide, thick-necked, wearing earpieces and ill-fitting blazers that struggled to conceal shoulder holsters. Thorne blinked. He had clearly expected Flora, exhausted, terrified, easily bullied. He hadn't expected Ronald Beasley, 6'2", soaking wet, and radiating enough rage to power the city grid. Mr. Beasley, Thorne said, his voice smooth, recovering quickly. This is unexpected. Your mother was under the impression you were detained at the merger. My mother is under a lot of false impressions today, Ronald said. He filled the doorway, his arm resting, high on the frame, blocking any view into the apartment. Turn around, Thorne. Walk away. Thorne chuckled, reaching into his breast pocket. I'm afraid I can't do that, Ronald. I'm acting as an agent of the court. He produced a folded document, stamped with the official seal of Miami-Dade County. I have an emergency custody order for the removal of 2 minors, Oliver and Emma Bishop, from these premises, Thorne recited, tapping the paper. Based on credible reports of hazardous living conditions, neglect, and the mental instability of the custodial parent, we are authorized to transport them to a secure facility immediately. Ronald looked at the paper, then back at Thorne's face. Hazardous conditions, Ronald repeated flatly. Look around, Thorne said, gesturing vaguely at the peeling paint in the hallway. This is a slum, Mr. Beasley. It's no place for your heirs. We're doing this for their safety. Now, if you'll step aside, my associates will collect the children. We have a nanny waiting in the car. One of the muscle-bound men took a step forward. Ronald didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lowered his chin, and the Beasley stare, that legendary, icy blue glare that had caused grown men to weep in depositions, locked onto the guard. Take one more step, Ronald whispered, and you will spend the rest of your life in a hole so deep you'll need a telescope to see sunlight. The guard hesitated. He looked at Thorne. Mr. Beasley, Thorne sighed, his tone turning condescending. I understand this is emotional, but obstruction of a court order is a felony. I have the law on my side. You have a piece of paper signed by Judge Holloway, Ronald corrected. A judge who, if I recall, has a vacation home in the Keys that was financed by a shell company linked to my mother's charitable trust. Thorne's smile faltered. That is a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, it's leverage, Ronald said. He took a half step out of the apartment, forcing Thorne to retreat slightly. And you, Thorne, you work for Miller & Stroud, correct? I'm a partner, Thorne said, straightening his tie. You were a partner, Ronald said calmly, because as of 5 minutes ago, I decided that Miller & Stroud is a liability. I insure your firm, Thorne. Beasley Mutual holds your malpractice policies. I also own the building your office is in, and the server farm that hosts your email. Ronald leaned in, his voice dropping to a terrifying, intimate level. If you or your hired gorillas cross this threshold, I will bankrupt you. I won't just sue you. I will dismantle your life. I will freeze your assets. I will audit every client you've ever had. I will make you so toxic that you won't be able to get a job managing a shift at a drive-thru. Thorne paled. He looked at the document in his hand, then at the man in front of him. He had come prepared for a hysterical mother. He had not come prepared for the full weight of the American economy staring him in the face. Ronald, Thorne stammered, the slick veneer cracking. Victoria. She was very specific. She said the children are in danger. The only danger to my children, Ronald snarled, is standing in this hallway. We have a legal obligation. You have an obligation to survival, Ronald cut him off. Walk away. Tell my mother the address was wrong. Tell her the place was empty. I don't care what you tell her. But if you try to take my son or my daughter, legal standing won't save you. The hallway was silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent light. The two guards looked at Thorne. They weren't paid enough to fight a billionaire who looked ready to kill with his bare hands. Thorne swallowed hard. He folded the paper and slipped it back into his pocket. You're making a mistake, Thorne said, though his voice lacked conviction. She won't stop. She'll send the sheriff next time, real police. You can't threaten them. Let me worry about the police, Ronald said. Get out of my building. Thorne adjusted his cuffs, trying to regain some shred of dignity. We'll be monitoring the exits. You can't keep them here forever. I don't need forever, Ronald said. I just need you gone. Thorne signaled to his men. They stepped back, retreating toward the stairs. Thorne cast one last look at the door, at the prize he had failed to secure, and then turned on his heel. Ronald watched them go. He listened to their footsteps descend the stairs, waiting until he heard the heavy metal door of the building entrance slam shut. He didn't relax. He didn't exhale. The adrenaline was still coursing through him, but now it was mixed with a cold, calculating dread. Vargas was right. This was just the first wave. Thorne was a corporate tool, easily scared by money. But if Victoria called the actual police, if she escalated this to a state-level manhunt, money wouldn't be enough. He stepped back into the apartment and locked the door, sliding the chain back into place. It felt flimsy now. Useless. The bedroom door opened. Flora stood there, Emma on her hip, Oliver in the crook of her arm. She looked pale, her eyes wide with shock. She had heard everything. You threatened to destroy him, she whispered. I bought us time, Ronald said. He grabbed the diaper bag she had packed. But not much. Thorne is right. The police will be next. Once law enforcement is involved, I can't stop them without getting arrested myself. So what do we do? Flora asked, her voice hitching. We're trapped. No, Ronald said. We aren't trapped. We're pivoting. He pulled out his phone. Vargas was 2 minutes out. We need to leave. Now, Ronald said. Go down the fire escape. Vargas will meet us in the alley. He has a secure vehicle. And you? I'm going to drive the Range Rover out the front, Ronald said. They'll follow me. They'll think we're all in the car. You're going to use yourself as bait? Flora asked, shifting the babies. Ronald walked over to her. He reached out and touched Oliver's cheek, then Emma's. The contact grounded him. It reminded him that the Beasley stare wasn't just a weapon. It was a shield. I'm the only bait she wants, Ronald said softly. He looked at Flora. Trust me, Flora. I need you to trust me one more time. Flora searched his face. She saw the exhaustion, the rain-soaked hair, the ruined clothes. But she also saw the man she had fallen in love with, stripped of his pretense. I trust you, she said. Good. Ronald moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. The black Suburban was still there, engine idling like a predator waiting in the deep. Get to the alley, Ronald commanded, and don't look back. As Flora wrestled the window open and stepped out onto the rusted iron grate of the fire escape, the rain began to fall again. Harder this time, washing away the dirt of the city, preparing the world for what was coming. Ronald waited until she was gone. Then he grabbed his keys. It was time to lead the wolf away from the den. Wait. Ronald stopped with his hand on the doorknob, the keys to the Range Rover digging into his palm. The plan, lead the wolves away while the sheep escape, was sound tactics, but bad strategy. He looked at Flora, who was halfway out the window onto the fire escape, the rain plastering her hair to her forehead. If I lead them away, Ronald said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. I'm just buying hours, maybe a day. Thorne will file a new motion tomorrow morning. Victoria will have a judge sign it before I can even get a lawyer on the phone. Ronald, we don't have time for a debate, Flora hissed, shielding Oliver's face from the blowing rain. I can't be the bait, Ronald said, turning back to the room. He grabbed his phone and dialed Vargas again. I have to be the father. What does that mean? It means that right now, in the eyes of the law, I am a stranger to these children. I'm not on the birth certificates. I haven't acknowledged paternity. If they take you into custody, I have no legal standing to stop them. I'm just a billionaire with a connection. He put the phone to his ear. Vargas, change of plan. I need the extraction team in the alley now. And I need someone to drive the Range Rover out the front, fast and reckless. Make them think I'm in it. Copy that. Vargas's voice crackled. I'll take the Rover. My team is in the alley with a sedan, gray Toyota, unmarked. Where are we going? Flora asked, stepping back into the room for a second, panic warring with confusion on her face. The Miami-Dade County Clerk of Courts, Ronald said, checking his watch. It was 4:10 p.m. They close at 5 if I sign a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity. Before that window shuts, Victoria's court order is worthless. She's claiming you're an unfit single mother. If I sign that paper, they aren't dealing with a single mother anymore. They're dealing with the joint custodian and the legal heir to the Beasley fortune. The courthouse is across town, Flora said, looking at the deluge outside. In this weather? In rush hour? Then we better start moving. The descent was a nightmare of slick iron and adrenaline. The fire escape was rusted, vibrating with every peal of thunder. Ronald went first, carrying the heavy diaper bag and shielding Flora's descent with his body. Every step was a calculation. One slip on the wet metal, and everything ended. Below them, in the narrow alleyway that smelled of wet garbage and ozone, a nondescript gray sedan idled. The back door was already open. As they reached the bottom landing, the sound of screeching tires erupted from the street out front. Ronald paused, looking through the gap in the buildings. He saw his black Range Rover roar away from the curb, jumping the median and tearing down the street against traffic. The black Suburban that had been idling peeled out in pursuit, sirens that weren't quite legal wailing. Vargas, Ronald whispered in gratitude. Go, go, go! A security operative in a soaked windbreaker waved them toward the sedan. They piled into the back seat. It was a tight squeeze. Ronald, Flora, and 2 car seats that they frantically buckled in with shaking hands. "The clerk's office, 73 West Flagler," Ronald commanded the driver. "You have 40 minutes." "Traffic is gridlocked on I-95, sir," the driver said, pulling out of the alley with a lurch. "The storm has flooded the lower avenues." "I don't care if you have to drive on the sidewalk," Ronald said, wiping water from his eyes. "Get us there." The car surged forward. Inside the cabin, the sound of the rain was a deafening drum roll. Flora was shivering, her teeth chattering audibly. She reached across the center console and gripped Ronald's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "What if we're too late?" she whispered. "We won't be," Ronald said, squeezing her hand. He stared out the window at the blurred red taillights of the stalled traffic. "My mother relies on protocol. She relies on fear. She thinks we're running to hide. She won't expect us to run toward the government." "Ronald," Flora said softly, "if you sign those papers, there's no going back. You're legally bound for 18 years. For life." Ronald looked at the car seats. Emma was awake, staring at the roof of the car, her tiny hand batting at a shadow. "I've signed billion-dollar mergers that I regret," Ronald said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've signed layoffs. I've signed away companies. This is the first time I'm signing something that actually adds value to my life." The driver swerved, mounting the curb to bypass a stalled delivery truck. The car rattled violently. "ETA 20 minutes, sir. It's going to be tight." 4:48 p.m. The gray Toyota screeched to a halt in the loading zone of the Miami-Dade County Courthouse. The building was a brutalist block of concrete, looming gray and imposing in the rain. "Stay with the car," Ronald ordered the driver. He threw the door open. He didn't have an umbrella. He didn't have his security detail. He had Flora, 2 babies in carriers, and 12 minutes. "Run," Ronald said. They sprinted. Ronald carried 2 car seats, 1 in each arm, the weight straining his biceps. Flora ran beside him, clutching the diaper bag which contained the birth certificates she had grabbed from the apartment. They hit the glass doors of the entrance. Locked. Ronald pounded on the glass. A security guard inside, bored and checking his watch, shook his head and pointed to the side exit. "Employees only." "Open the door!" Ronald roared. The sound was muffled by the glass, but the look on his face, the feral, desperate command of the Beasley stare, transcended the barrier. The guard hesitated, then walked over and pushed the bar. "We're closing, buddy. You can't." "Vital statistics." "Which floor?" Ronald didn't stop moving. He didn't offer an ID. He just kept walking with the momentum of a freight train. "Second floor," the guard stammered, stepping out of the way of the wet, frantic billionaire. "But the windows close at—" Ronald was already at the elevators. He slammed the button. Nothing happened. "Stairs?" Flora gasped. They hit the stairwell. Ronald took the steps 2 at a time, the carriers banging against his legs. His lungs burned. His expensive Italian shoes slipped on the linoleum. He burst onto the 2nd floor. The hallway was long and lined with chairs that were being stacked by janitorial staff. At the far end, a row of glass windows marked paternity and vital records. The lights behind the counter were flickering off. The metal grate was halfway down over the main window. "Wait!" Ronald shouted, his voice echoing in the empty hall. A woman behind the counter, already wearing her raincoat and holding her purse, looked up. She saw a man soaking wet, holding 2 babies, with a woman looking like a drowned rat trailing behind him. "We're closed," she said, her voice muffled by the lowering grate. "Come back tomorrow at 8 a.m. "No." Ronald reached the counter and shoved his hand under the grate, physically holding it up. The metal dug into his wrist, but he didn't flinch. I need to file a VAP, now. Sir, the system shuts down at 5. It's 4:56. I can't log a new entry. You can, Ronald panted, and you will. I really can't. Security. The woman looked past him, annoyed. My name, Ronald said, staring into her eyes with an intensity that made her pause, is Ronald Beasley. I own the company that built the software you use to process these records. I know for a fact the batch upload doesn't happen until 5:15. The clerk blinked. Recognition dawned on her face. She had seen this face on magazine covers, usually smiling, usually dry, usually looking down from a high place, not looking up from under a security grate, dripping water onto her counter. Mr. Beasley? These are my children, Ronald said, lifting the carrier slightly. Oliver and Emma. My mother is trying to take them. If I don't sign that paper in the next 3 minutes, they go into the system. They go away. He didn't threaten her. He didn't offer her money. He just told her the truth, stripped of all corporate jargon. Please, Flora added, stepping up beside him. She was crying, silent tears mixing with the rain on her face. Please. The clerk looked at the clock. 4:57. She looked at the babies. Then she looked at the grate resting on Ronald's wrist, seeing the blood starting to seep through his wet shirt cuff. She sighed, dropped her purse, and hit a button. The grate buzzed and lifted back up. You have 2 minutes, she said, pulling a form from a drawer. I need IDs, birth certificates, and a black pen. Flora slapped the documents onto the counter. Her hands were shaking so hard she dropped her ID. Ronald picked it up. Father's name is blank on the original, the clerk noted, typing furiously. That changes now, Ronald said. Sign here and here. Initial here. The sound of the pen scratching on paper was the loudest thing in the world. Ronald's signature, usually a practiced, elegant scrawl worth millions, was jagged and forceful. He pressed down so hard the paper nearly tore. I, Ronald James Beasley, acknowledge that I am the biological father of Oliver Beasley. I, Ronald James Beasley, acknowledge that I am the biological father of Emma Beasley. 4:59, the clerk muttered. She grabbed a heavy stamp. Thud clack. The sound echoed like a gunshot. And here. She stamped the second one. Thud clack. Is it done? Ronald asked. It's filed, the clerk said, handing him the carbon copies. Congratulations, Mr. Beasley. You're a dad. On paper, at least. Ronald took the papers. He held them with more reverence than he had ever held a stock certificate. He looked at Flora. She slumped against the counter, letting out a sob of relief that buckled her knees. Ronald caught her, pulling her into his side. We did it, he whispered into her wet hair. They're safe. His phone began to ring. It wasn't Vargas. It wasn't the office. The screen lit up with a photo of a woman who looked like an older, colder version of himself. Mother. The clerk watched him, wide-eyed. Ronald pulled the phone out. He didn't step away. He didn't lower his voice. He answered it on speaker, placing it on the counter next to the stamped documents. Ronald, Victoria Beasley's voice was ice. My team tells me the apartment in Little Havana was empty, and that your Range Rover was driven by a security guard who is currently being arrested for reckless driving. This is a tantrum, Ronald. Where are the assets? Ronald looked at the carbon copy of the paternity acknowledgement. He traced the name Oliver Beasley with his thumb. The children, Mother, Ronald corrected, his voice eerily calm. They aren't assets, and they aren't hiding. Don't play games with me. I have a court order. I have Judge Halloway on speed dial. If you don't surrender them within the hour, I will have you declared mentally incompetent to lead the company. I will strip you of everything. You have a court order for the children of Flora Bishop, Ronald said, but those children don't exist anymore. There was a pause on the line, a sharp intake of breath. Victoria was smart. She did the math instantly. What did you do? I'm at the Hall of Records, Ronald said. The ink is still wet. I have formally acknowledged paternity. They are Beasley's mother, fully recognized, which means as of 1 minute ago, I am their legal guardian. And since your court order doesn't name me as an unfit parent, it is currently worth less than the toilet paper in the executive washroom. You fool, Victoria hissed, her composure cracking. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've tied yourself to them. You've exposed the trust. I've secured the legacy, Ronald said. My legacy, not yours. I will contest it. I will demand DNA tests. I will drag this out for years. Do it, Ronald challenged. I'll take the DNA test on live television, and while we wait for the results, I'll release the internal audit of your offshore accounts I found last night, the ones funneling money to the Cayman Islands. The silence on the other end was absolute. They are my Beasleys now, Victoria, Ronald said, his voice dropping to a growl. You can't touch them. You can't move them. And if you ever send a man like Thorne after my family again, I won't just fire you. I will prosecute you. He didn't wait for a response. He tapped the red icon, ending the call. The silence in the hallway was heavy, but it wasn't oppressive anymore. It was the silence of a battlefield after the final cannon has fired. Ronald looked at the clerk, who was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. Sorry about the grate, Ronald said. He picked up the car seats. He looked at Flora, who was drying her eyes, a small, tentative smile breaking through the exhaustion. Let's go home, Ronald said. Real home. The drive south was silent, a hush that felt less like peace and more like the vacuum before an explosion. Vargas navigated the gray Toyota away from the city center, bypassing the main highways for the coastal roads. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a bruised purple sky and streets slick with oil and runoff. Where are we going? Flora asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. She was slumped in the back seat, exhausted, her hand resting on Oliver's car seat. Key Biscayne, Ronald said, looking out the window at the passing palm trees. I bought a property there 5 years ago, a spec house. Modern, secluded, walls of impact-resistant glass. I never moved in. I never even listed it. It's held by a shell corporation that has no direct link to Beasley Industries. Does she know about it? Flora asked. She didn't have to specify who she was. Victoria knows my portfolio, Ronald said, turning to look at her. But she doesn't know my failures. I bought that house, thinking I might want a different life one day. When I realized I was too married to the company to leave Brickell, I buried the deed in a dormant LLC. It's the one place on earth where the Beasley gaze doesn't reach. Vargas pulled up to a gated driveway shrouded by dense banyan trees. The gate didn't have a keypad. It required a physical key, which Vargas produced from the glove box. They wound down a long, crushed shell driveway until the house appeared. It was a stark, angular masterpiece of concrete and glass, cantilevered over the dark water of the bay. It looked impenetrable, a fortress. Get them inside, Ronald said, opening the car door. I need to secure the perimeter. The house was empty, smelling of stale air and expensive minimalist furniture that had never been sat on. It was cold, but it was safe. Ronald spent the first hour pacing the property with Vargas, checking the sight lines, the alarm systems, and the backup generator. When he finally came back, inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The stark living room, with its white leather sofas and glass tables, had been colonized. The diaper bag was exploded on the coffee table. A bottle warmer, which Flora had miraculously packed, was glowing green on the kitchen island. And on the pristine white rug, Emma was kicking her legs while Flora tried to wrestle a onesie over her head. I need help, Flora said, not looking up. She sounded close to tears. Oliver is hungry, and the bottle isn't warm yet, and Emma needs a change, and I only have 2 hands, Ronald." Ronald froze. He had just negotiated a hostile standoff with a corporate fixer and strong-armed a government clerk. He could dismantle a company in an afternoon, but a crying infant terrified him. "Tell me what to do," Ronald said, stepping onto the rug. He took off his suit jacket, the ruined, soaking wet Italian wool, and tossed it onto a chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his dress shirt, revealing forearms stained with ink and rain. "Pick up Oliver," Flora instructed, pointing to the carrier where the boy was starting to whimper. "He needs to be burped before he eats, or he gets gas. Over the shoulder. Firm pats. Not too hard, not too soft." Ronald lifted his son. Oliver felt fragile, yet dense with life. Ronald placed him against his shoulder, feeling the damp warmth of the baby's breath on his neck. Firm pats. He tapped the small back. Oliver squirmed. "Am I doing it right?" Ronald asked, panic edging his voice. "You're doing fine," Flora said, snapping the last button on Emma's outfit. She looked up at him. "Relax, Ronald. He can feel your heart rate. If you're stressed, he's stressed." Ronald closed his eyes. He inhaled the scent of the baby, milk and innocence. He forced his shoulders to drop. He forced his breathing to slow. Burp. A tiny wet sound erupted from Oliver. Ronald opened his eyes, a grin spreading across his face that felt foreign and wide. "He did it. He did," Flora smiled, taking the warm bottle from the counter. "Now, give him to me. You take Emma. She needs a change." Ronald's smile faltered. "A change?" "Diapers, Ronald. You claimed them as Beasley's. That includes the messy parts." She handed him a fresh diaper and a packet of wipes. Ronald looked at Emma, who was staring up at him with those electric blue eyes. His eyes. She looked expectant. "Okay," Ronald said, kneeling down. "We can do this. It's just engineering, waste disposal management." He approached the task with the same intensity he applied to a schematic. He analyzed the tabs. He assessed the structural integrity of the wipe. He made a mistake, corrected it, and finally, after 3 minutes of intense concentration, managed to secure the fresh diaper. It was a little crooked, but it held. He lifted Emma up, holding her face level with his. She reached out and grabbed his nose. "You have big hands," Flora said softly. Ronald turned. Flora was feeding Oliver on the sofa, watching him. No. Exhaustion was still etched into her face, but the fear was gone. In the soft light of the kitchen, she looked beautiful. "I have missed so much," Ronald said, his voice thick. He sat down next to her on the white sofa, Emma resting in the crook of his arm. "You're here now," Flora repeated the words from the apartment, but this time they carried a different weight. "But for how long, Ronald?" "Tomorrow. Tomorrow the sun comes up. Your mother will have regrouped." "Let her regroup," Ronald said. He looked at the wall of glass facing the bay. The water was black, restless. "I'm not playing defense anymore, Flora." He reached out and touched her hand, the one holding the bottle. "I used to think the company was the legacy," he murmured. "I thought the buildings, the stock price, the name on the tower. I thought that was immortality. But looking at them—" He glanced down at Emma, who was falling asleep against his chest. "It's all just dust, isn't it?" "It's not dust," Flora said gently. "It's power. And right now, you need that power to protect them." "I don't just need power," Ronald said, his eyes hardening, the blue turning to steel. "I need ammunition." He squeezed her hand, then stood up, careful not to wake Emma. He placed the baby gently in the portable crib Flora had set up. "Get some sleep," Ronald said. "You and the kids. I have work to do." "Ronald," Flora warned, "you haven't slept in 20 hours." I'll sleep when she's gone, Ronald said. Tonight, I'm going to do the one thing Victoria never taught me to do. I'm going to burn the rule book. The war room was the dining table. It was a slab of raw teak, now covered with laptops, tablets, and a tangled web of charging cables. Ronald sat at the head, the glow of 3 screens illuminating his face in the dark room. It was 2 a.m. The house was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the servers Ronald was remotely accessing. He wasn't logging in as the CEO. That access would be flagged. Victoria's IT team would be watching his official credentials like hawks. Instead, he was using a backdoor, a root-level access key he had coded himself 15 years ago, back when he was just the chief technology officer, before he wore suits, when he was just a brilliant engineer who didn't trust anyone. He called it the janitor. It gave him ghost access to everything: emails, financials, the metadata of the empire. But he needed a guide. He knew the tech, but he didn't know the politics of the last 18 months. He picked up his burner phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "You have some nerve," a groggy female voice answered. "Elena," Ronald said. "I need a favor." "A favor?" Elena sounded wide awake now. "Ronald, do you have any idea what's happening? The stock is down 8%. The board has called an emergency session for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Victoria is moving for a vote of no confidence. She's spinning a narrative that you've had a mental breakdown." "Let the stock drop," Ronald said calmly. "It'll make the buyback cheaper." "You're serious," Elena breathed. "You really found them?" "I found them. I claimed them. They're safe." "Good," Elena said, her voice softening. "So, you're calling to tell me you're out? You're taking your golden parachute and going to play daddy?" "No," Ronald said. "I'm calling to ask if you want to buy the company." Silence. Long, heavy silence. "Excuse me?" "Not the whole company," Ronald corrected. "The rot. I'm going to purge the board, Elena. I'm going to strip it down to the studs. But to do that, I need to know who is loyal to my mother. I need to know who she's bought. Ronald, everyone knows Victoria pays people off. But you'll never prove it. She uses shell companies, offshore trusts. It's clean." "Nothing is clean," Ronald said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's always a digital footprint. I'm looking at the ledger now. But I need names. Who, on the board, suddenly bought a new vacation home last year? Who got a seat on a charitable foundation they aren't qualified for?" "Start with Sterling," Elena said immediately. "The CFO, he approved the Q3 variance reports without blinking. And check the legal retainers. Miller and Stroud." "Thorne's firm," Ronald muttered. "I already met him." "There's something else," Elena said. "Rumor is Victoria has been funneling money into a project called Blue Horizon. No one knows what it is. It's listed under R&D, but there's no product." "Blue Horizon." Ronald typed it into the command line. "Thanks, Elena. If I survive tomorrow, the merger is back on, but on my terms." "Just survive, Ronald. For those kids." He hung up. Blue Horizon. He initiated the search. The janitor crawled through the servers, bypassing firewalls, decrypting localized files. It took 20 minutes. When the file opened, Ronald expected to see blueprints. He expected to see a failed tech prototype. Instead, he saw bank transfers, thousands of them. Small amounts at first, then escalating. Transfers to the Cayman Islands. Transfers to Zurich. Transfers to a company called VB Consulting. He clicked on the expenses. Private jet charter, V. Beasley, jewelry, Cartier, legal services, Miller and Stroud, retainer, $500,000 month, campaign donation, Judge Holloway re-election fund. Ronald felt a cold fury settle in his gut. It wasn't just embezzlement, it was looting. For years, Victoria had lectured him on fiscal responsibility. She had denied him budget for employee bonuses. She had cut funding for community outreach, citing lean quarters. And all the while, she had been treating the company treasury like her personal piggy bank. But then he found the smoking gun, a folder labeled contingency. He opened it. It was a scanned PDF, a trust document, drafted 3 years ago. The Victoria Beasley Revocable Trust. He scrolled to the assets section. Upon the incapacitation or removal of Ronald Beasley, all voting shares shall revert to the trustee, Victoria Beasley, for the duration of the minority of any heirs. She didn't just want the kids, Ronald whispered to the empty room. He read the next clause: funds allocated for the education and behavioral correction of said heirs to be drawn from the Blue Horizon operational budget. She was going to use his own company's money, stolen money, to pay for the boarding schools she planned to imprison his children in. She was going to finance their misery with the profits of his labor. Ronald sat back. The screen illuminated his face, casting deep shadows under his eyes. He had the proof. He had the bank routings. He had the emails from Thorne confirming the bribes to the judge. He had the dates, the times, the IP addresses. He wasn't just going to fire her. He was going to annihilate her. He looked over at the portable crib where Oliver and Emma were sleeping. They were peaceful, oblivious to the war being waged and the gigabytes of data swirling above their heads. Ronald reached into his pocket and pulled out a thumb drive. He plugged it in, copying files. The progress bar filled up. Green, steady, unstoppable. He pulled the drive out and closed the laptop. He walked over to the window. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, a faint, bruised purple line on the horizon. The storm was over. The sun was coming. Ronald Beasley put the thumb drive in his pocket. He picked up his phone and sent one text message to Vargas. "Suit up. We're going to the office." The storm had washed Miami clean. Outside the 50-foot windows of the Beasley Corp boardroom, the sky was a piercing, innocent blue. The sun glinted off the sailboats bobbing in Biscayne Bay, a picture-perfect postcard of a city at peace. Inside, the air was toxic. The boardroom was a cavern of mahogany and brushed steel, chilled to a meat locker temperature. 12 members of the board sat around the oval table in stiff leather chairs. They shifted uncomfortably, glancing at their watches, at their tablets, anywhere but at the woman sitting at the head of the table. Victoria Beasley looked immaculate. She wore a cream Chanel suit that cost more than most of her employees earned in a year. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of perfection. Her hands were folded on the table, not a tremor in her manicured fingers. But her eyes, Beasley blue, cold and sharp, were scanning the room like a predator looking for weak links. "We will begin," Victoria announced, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "It is 9 a.m. The CEO is absent." "Maybe he's stuck in traffic," murmured George Sterling, the CFO. He was sweating, dabbing his upper lip with a handkerchief. "The flooding from last night." "Ronald does not get stuck in traffic, George," Victoria said, dismissing him with a flick of her wrist. "Ronald is not here because Ronald is currently incapable of leading this company." She stood up, pressing a button on the console. The blinds lowered slightly, dimming the room. "For months, I have shielded this board from the truth," Victoria began, her tone dripping with mock sorrow. "I hoped it was a phase, burnout, midlife crisis. But yesterday's events, abandoning a multi-billion-dollar merger, assaulting a process server, disappearing with a woman of questionable stability, it forces my hand." She looked around the room, making eye contact with every member. "We are a publicly traded company. We rely on confidence. And right now, Ronald is a liability. He is erratic. He is emotional. And frankly, He is compromised. She paused for effect. I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence. We will remove him as CEO, effective immediately, and appoint an interim leadership council. I have taken the liberty of drafting the press release. Victoria, a board member named Harold, spoke up. Ronald built the infrastructure division from scratch. To oust him, without him being present, is necessary, Victoria snapped, before he drives the stock price into the dirt. Do we have a second? I second, Sterling said quickly, too quickly. Good. All in favor? The heavy double doors at the end of the room didn't just open, they were kicked. Bam! The sound echoed like a gunshot. Heads snapped around. Ronald Beasley walked in. He wasn't wearing the bespoke Italian suit that was his armor. He wasn't wearing a tie. He was wearing dark denim jeans and a black polo shirt that was slightly wrinkled. His hair was damp, as if he had just showered in a hurry. He hadn't shaved, and the dark stubble on his jaw made him look dangerous. But it was the accessory slung over his shoulder that made the room gasp. It wasn't a briefcase. It was a quilted gray diaper bag with a cartoon giraffe on the pocket. Ronald walked the length of the room, his boots thudding against the plush carpet. He didn't look at the board members. He looked straight at Victoria. He reached the head of the table. Victoria didn't move, but her eyes narrowed. You're late, she said, ice in her veins, and you're underdressed. We were just discussing your severance. Ronald didn't speak. He swung the diaper bag off his shoulder and dropped it onto the mahogany table. Thud. The heavy bag landed right in front of Sterling, who flinched as if it were a bomb. Ronald, Victoria warned, her voice tightening. This is a boardroom, not a nursery. Have you lost your mind? On the contrary, Mother, Ronald said. His voice wasn't loud. It was conversational, terrifyingly calm. I finally found it. He pulled a chair out, not the CEO's chair, but the one directly to the right of it, and sat down. He spun a thumb drive in his fingers. You were discussing a vote, Ronald said. Please, continue. I'd love to hear the justification. The justification, Victoria hissed, leaning over the table, is that you are unstable. You missed the Horizon merger to chase a skirt. You threatened a lawyer. You are acting irrationally. Irrationally, Ronald repeated. He slotted the thumb drive into the console embedded in the table. That's an interesting word. I've always been a fan of data. Let's look at the data. He pressed a key. The massive screen behind Victoria, which had been displaying the company logo, flickered. A photo appeared. It was high resolution. It was taken 3 hours ago in the soft morning light of the beach house. Oliver and Emma were sitting on the white rug, looking directly at the camera. Their eyes, bright, electric, undeniable Beasley blue, shone like beacons. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Board members, Ronald said, gesturing to the screen. Meet the new majority shareholders, Oliver and Emma Beasley. Bastards, Victoria spat, her composure cracking. Unproven, illegitimate. Legally recognized as of 4:59 p.m. yesterday, Ronald corrected. Vital statistics confirms it. They are my heirs. They are the future of this company. And they are the reason I am restructuring the board. You can't restructure anything, Victoria shouted. We are voting you out. Are you? Ronald asked. He tapped the keyboard again. The photo of the smiling babies vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared. It was dense, complicated, and highlighted in aggressive red. This, Ronald said, standing up and walking toward the screen, is a ledger from a shell company called VB Consulting, registered in the Cayman Islands. He pointed to a column of numbers. George, Ronald said, turning to the sweating CFO. Care to explain why we transferred $12 million of R&D funding to a consulting firm that has no employees and no office? Sterling turned a pale shade of gray. That was Classified project allocation. Project Blue Horizon, Ronald nodded. I saw the file. Tell me, George, since when does R&D involve private jet charters for my mother? Or a $500,000 monthly retainer to Miller and Stroud? The board members began to mutter. Papers were shuffled. Looks were exchanged. This is a fabrication, Victoria said, though her voice lacked its usual steel. She stood up, trying to block the screen with her body. He forged this. He's trying to frame me. I have the bank routing numbers, Mother, Ronald said, stepping around her. I have the emails. I have the receipts. He clicked the remote again. A document appeared. The trust agreement she had tried to use against Flora. And I have this, Ronald said, his voice dropping to a low growl. A contingency plan to use company funds, stolen funds, to imprison my children in a boarding school in Switzerland. You weren't just stealing from the shareholders, Victoria. You were stealing from my family to destroy my family. Ronald turned to face the 12 men and women sitting at the table. Here is the situation, he said. My mother has been embezzling from this company for 5 years. She has bribed judges. She has falsified expense reports. This is federal fraud. It is prison time. He leaned his hands on the table, the Beasley stare boring into them. If you vote with her today, you are accomplices. I will hand this drive to the SEC and the FBI, and you will all go down with the ship. He paused. Or, Ronald said, straightening up, you vote for a new direction, a direction that values transparency, a direction that builds a legacy for those 2 children on the screen, not a slush fund for a narcissist. He looked at Sterling. Your choice, George. Prison? Or the golden parachute I'm offering if you resign right now? Sterling looked at Victoria. Then he looked at the spreadsheet. I resign, Sterling whispered. He stood up, gathered his papers, and walked out of the room without looking back. One by one, the dominoes fell. I move to table the vote of no confidence, Harold said. Seconded, said another member. Motion passed, Ronald said. Victoria stood alone at the head of the table. Her allies had fled. Her armor was shattered. She looked small. For the first time in Ronald's life, she looked old. She turned to him. The rage was gone, replaced by a desperate, clawing manipulation. Her eyes welled with tears, a performance she had perfected over decades. Ronald, she said, her voice trembling, I did it for you. Everything I built, the discipline, the toughness. I did it to make you strong, to make you a king. She reached out a hand, trying to touch his arm. A mother does what she has to do, to protect her son's future. You have children now. You'll understand one day. You have to be ruthless to survive. Ronald looked at her hand. He remembered the cold handshake at the airport when he was 7. He remembered the silence of the penthouse. He remembered Flora's terrified face in the rain. I am ruthless, Mother, Ronald said softly. But I'm not you. He stepped back, out of her reach. You didn't do this for me. You did it for yourself. You viewed me as an asset to be managed, not a son to be loved. And when you saw Oliver and Emma, you didn't see grandchildren. You saw new assets. Victoria stiffened, the tears drying instantly as she realized the ploy wasn't working. I built this company, she snarled. You are nothing without me. I am a father, Ronald said, and that is something you never figured out how to be. He looked her dead in the eye. You would destroy your own son for control. You would have erased my children to keep your checkbook balanced. That isn't business, Mother. That's evil. Ronald pressed the intercom button on the table. Vargas, come in. The side door opened instantly. Luis Vargas stepped in, flanked by 2 uniformed security officers. Escort Ms. Beasley from the building, Ronald ordered. Her access credentials have been revoked. She is to take nothing but her purse. Victoria gasped. You can't do this. I am the chairman. Not anymore, Ronald said. You're fired. Vargas stepped forward. Ma'am, this way. Victoria looked around the room. The board members looked down at their hands. The screen behind her still glowed with the evidence of her crimes. She straightened her Chanel jacket. She lifted her chin. She tried to summon the dignity of the matriarch one last time. You will regret this, she spat at Ronald as she walked past him. You will run this company into the ground with your emotions. Maybe, Ronald said, picking up the diaper bag from the table. But I'll sleep at night. He watched her go. He watched the doors close behind her, sealing off the past. The room was silent. Ronald looked at the screen, at Oliver and Emma. He took a deep breath. The air in the room didn't feel cold anymore. Harold, Ronald said, turning to the remaining senior board member. Get legal in here. We have a lot of work to do. Yes, Mr. Beasley, Harold said, nodding with a newfound respect. Ronald sat down in the chair at the head of the table. It was just a chair. He opened the diaper bag. Pooh, 2 years later. The Miami skyline didn't look like a bar graph anymore. For decades, Ronald Beasley had viewed the city of Brickell as a series of vertical assets. Concrete spires representing market share, dominance, and equity. He had looked at the horizon and seen only profit. Now, cruising south down Brickell Avenue with the top down, he saw it for what it really was, a city of light. The Sunday traffic was light, a lazy procession of tourists and locals heading toward the water. The humidity that usually choked the city was gone, replaced by a crisp, salty breeze coming off Biscayne Bay. Ronald drove the vintage convertible, a 1966 Shelby Cobra in cherry red, with one hand on the wheel. It was a loud, impractical, dangerous car. The old Ronald, the man who lived in the back of an armored Maybach, would have hated it. He would have called it an unnecessary risk. But the new Ronald Beasley understood that life was nothing but risk, and the payoff was worth it. Faster, Daddy, faster! The shout came from the back seat. Oliver, now a sturdy, energetic 2.5-year-old, was strapped into a high-end leather car seat, his arms thrown up in the air, as if he were on a roller coaster. Beside him, Emma was giggling, her dark curls whipping around her face in a chaotic halo. The speed limit is 35, buddy, Ronald called back, catching Oliver's eye in the rearview mirror. Those eyes. They were still the same electric, piercing blue. The Beasley blue. But they weren't terrifying anymore. They didn't make board members sweat or competitors fold. They were bright, curious, and filled with a joy that Ronald had never known existed. Beside him in the passenger seat, Flora laughed. She was wearing a white sundress and oversized sunglasses, her hair tied back in a silk scarf. She looked radiant. The exhaustion of the walk-up apartment, the fear of the chase, the shadows of the hurricane, they were gone. In their place was a calm, grounded confidence. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. Don't encourage him, Flora teased, resting her hand on Ronald's knee. He already thinks he owns the road. He's a Beasley, Ronald shrugged, grinning. It's genetic. He's a Bishop Beasley, Flora corrected gently, which means he also has to have manners. Fair point. They passed the financial district. The towering glass monoliths gleamed in the afternoon sun. Look, Emma shouted, pointing a chubby finger toward the tallest building on the strip. A sleek, 70-story needle of steel and glass that dominated the skyline. Daddy's house. Daddy's building, Oliver corrected her, with the seriousness of a tiny foreman. Not a house, Em. A headquarters, Ronald chuckled. You've been listening to Elena again. Auntie Elena says you have the big chair, Oliver stated proudly. Ronald glanced up at the tower as they passed. The Beasley Corp logo was still there, silver and imposing. But the company inside had changed. After the Bloody Monday board meeting 2 years ago, the purge had been swift. Victoria was gone, exiled to her estate in the Hamptons, with a legion of lawyers trying to keep her out of federal prison. Her allies were gone. In their place, Ronald had built something new. He had brought Elena on as a strategic partner. He had launched the Bishop Initiative, a massive philanthropic arm dedicated to family law reform and affordable housing in neighborhoods like Little Havana. He still made billions. The company was more profitable than ever. But the profit had a purpose now. He wasn't building a legacy of money. He was building a world his children could actually live in. "It's just a building, guys," Ronald said. "The house is where we keep the toys. That's way more important." "And the snacks," Flora added. "Crucial," Ronald agreed. He eased the car into the left lane as they approached the intersection of 8th Street and Brickell. The light turned yellow, then red. Ronald braked, bringing the rumble of the engine to a low idle. He sat there for a moment, waiting for the cross-traffic. And then he realized where he was. This was the spot. He looked out the driver's side window. The sidewalk was dry today, baked warm by the sun. People were walking by in shorts and sandals, eating ice cream, walking dogs. But in his mind's eye, Ronald saw the ghost of a storm. He saw the gray sheets of rain crashing down. He saw the black asphalt turning into a river. He saw the armored Maybach stalled in the gridlock, a coffin of luxury. And he saw her. He saw the woman in the beige trench coat, wrestling with a broken umbrella, shielding 2 bundles from the deluge. He felt the phantom kick of adrenaline in his chest, the moment his hollow life had collided with his destiny. He looked over at the passenger seat. The ghost in the trench coat was gone. The woman sitting there was warm, real, and safe. Flora noticed him staring. She lowered her sunglasses, looking at him with concern. "Ronald, you okay?" Ronald blinked, the memory receding, replaced by the golden light of the present. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "I'm okay. I was just remembering." He gestured to the sidewalk. "That's where I saw you. Right there. By the hydrant." Flora looked. She went quiet for a moment, tracing the line of the curb with her eyes. "I was so scared that day," she whispered. "I was down to my last pack of diapers. I was walking to the bus stop because I couldn't afford a cab. And then I saw the limo." "I almost didn't look out the window," Ronald confessed. He gripped the steering wheel, the leather creaking under his hands. "I was so busy being miserable. I was looking at my reflection in the glass. If I hadn't looked past myself, if the lightning hadn't flashed at that exact second..." He trailed off. The alternative was too dark to contemplate. A life where he signed the merger. A life where he never knew Oliver and Emma. A life where he grew old and rich and died alone in a tower of silence. "But you did look," Flora said. She reached across the console and covered his hand on the gear shift. Her skin was warm. "You stopped the car, Ronald." "I stopped the car," he repeated. In the back seat, Oliver and Emma were bickering over a toy car. It was a chaotic, noisy, beautiful sound. "Daddy, light!" Oliver shouted. Ronald looked up. The light had turned green. He looked at the intersection one last time. It wasn't a place of trauma anymore. It was hallowed ground. It was the place where the king of Brickell had died, and the father had been born. He looked at Flora. "Ready for lunch?" She smiled, and it was brighter than the Miami sun. Always. Ronald shifted gears. The engine roared, a deep, throaty sound of power and freedom. He didn't look back at the tower. He didn't look back at the ghost of the rain. He pressed the gas, driving forward into the light, with his whole world sitting right there in the car with him. "Here we go," Ronald said. And they drove into the sun. Some stories end with the signing of a contract, or the building of a monument. But this story ended the way the truest legacies begin, not with a merger, but with a memory made in the sun. Ronald Beasley spent a lifetime building a tower of ice, only to realize that his greatest wealth was sitting in the back seat of a vintage convertible. Looking back, would you have stopped the car? Would you have risked $1 billion empire and defied your own mother to protect a family you didn't know existed? Ronald traded his corporate crown for the role of a father. Do you think it was a fair trade? Your participation means the world to this channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. Thank you for watching. If this journey moved you, please subscribe to Stories That Touch and leave a comment below, rating the story from 0 to 10. Your feedback and support allow us to keep telling stories that matter. Stay tuned for the next emotional journey.